Hey, 321. So we are starting a new book for Read Aloud this week. The book is called Zero Grandparents by Michelle Edwards. And let's look at the back blurb. It's Grandparents' Day at Jackson Magnet. Mrs. Fennessy's class is having a big celebration for Grandparents' Day. Everyone is excited, everyone except Calliope James. She doesn't have a grandma or a grandpa. How can Calliope celebrate without a grandparent of her own? So let's get started. Zero grandparents. Here's the table of contents. The big news, a special day, zero grandmas, Grandma Goldie, pictures, Grandparents' Day, Lori Sophia, and pie. So this chapter is called The Big News. Calliope James raced to school. Second grade at Jackson Magnet was great. So whenever I start reading a new book, especially a chapter book, I start thinking about the characters. So we know she's a second grader. Calliope and her two best friends, Howie and Paulia, were all in the same class, Mrs. Fennessy's class. Room 201. Calliope sat behind Paulia. Howie sat behind Calliope. Three best friends all in a row. So then here are the best friends. Her name is Howardina, but I think she goes by Howie, Calliope, and you can't see that, and Paulia. Calliope said hi to her best friends. She gave each of them a super smile and slid into her seat. She took out her pencil and checked the point. Not sharp enough, she thought. Grind, grind. Calliope liked her pencil very sharp. Grind. So them saying grind means that she's sharpening her pencil. I'm picturing somebody sitting there with one of those little pencil sharpeners going grind, grind. Now she was ready. Calliope could hardly wait for Mrs. Fennessy to say, time for math. Math was first thing every morning. Calliope loved math. Good morning, class, said Mrs. Fennessy. Calliope sat up straight. She touched her pencil point. Perfect. So I'm wondering that Calliope is the kind of student who loves school. She comes into the classroom, she gets her materials ready, she's ready to learn. Before we start math today, said Mrs. Fennessy, I have a very important announcement. What could be more important than math? Calliope hoped they weren't going to do an art project. She hated getting glue all over her fingers. Well, I know from reading the back blurb that Grandparents' Day is coming. So I'm wondering if this big announcement is going to be Grandparents' Day. When everyone is quiet, said Mrs. Fennessy, I'll know you are ready to hear the big news. Maybe they were going on a field trip to the zoo or to the children's museum or the planetarium. Calliope could feel her heart beating faster. Field trips are the best, Calliope thought. She quickly folded her hands and waited. A special day. Next Wednesday will be Grandparents' Day at Jackson Magnet, Mrs. Fennessy told the class. You may bring your grandparents to school. We will have a welcome time, and you can tell us all about them. Calliope scrunched down in her seat. So I'm picturing her, she kind of scrunched down in her seat. We will have a big party, said Mrs. Fennessy. It will be a very special day. Calliope felt the empty space between her two front teeth. She wrote zeros all over her notebook. 0, 0, 0. So I'm thinking right now that Calliope is upset. It didn't say that she was upset, but she's writing the word zero all over her notebook, and it says that she scrunched down in her seat. I know when people scrunch down, they're feeling kind of upset, right? As a reader, you need to look at how characters are acting with their bodies, because sometimes you can tell how a character is feeling by looking at what their body is doing. Calliope had zero grandparents to bring to school. She had zero grandparents to welcome. They were all dead. Now, some of you might not have a grandparent to bring, said Mrs. Fennessy softly. You may want to bring a special friend, or you may want to share a friend's grandparent. Paulia turned around. She smiled at Calliope. Howie tapped her on the shoulder. So it looks like her friends are being caring, right? They know that she doesn't have any grandparents. Palia and Howie had grandparents to share. They both had grandparents who lived with them. Calliope scratched her arm. Her skin felt prickly and itchy. Her eyes felt warm and watery. She didn't want to share grandparents with her best friends. Calliope wanted her own. Next chapter is called Zero Grandmas. Calliope burst into the kitchen. She threw her backpack down. Slam. Is something wrong? Asked Mrs. James. Yes, said Calliope. She grabbed an apple and her big bag of Halloween candy. Next Wednesday is Grandparents' Day. And I'm actually going to stop us there. All right? One of the reasons why I picked this book to read is because Calliope feels kind of upset that her family is different, right? I know there might be times where you may have felt that your family is different, or a time when you really wanted a family member to come to school, but maybe they lived far away, or they had to work, or they couldn't come in, right? So I think a lot of us probably know how Calliope is feeling right now. So before I stop reading, I'm going to write on a Post-it note. What's happening so far in the book, and how is, and what are the, and where, who are the characters, and what are they doing, right? So my character is Calliope, and she is upset because she doesn't have grandparents to bring to Grandparents' Day. You will have to stay tuned to see what happens next.